Krishna Chaitanya. So, I was supposed to send a post. I thought I sent a post telling you the class was going to be later, but I don't know if I actually sent it. Apparently I didn't send it, and I couldn't make it at 7:30, so we're starting a half hour later, and hopefully somebody can send a message out. Yeah. Anyway, I just sent a message saying I was going to start a half hour later. Shnubadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Tinamane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharine Nirvisesa Sannivadi Paschatya Dasatarine Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shadvaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhaktivinoda. So, Tuesday's class, we ended up talking about emotional control, which is in the same vein as the other classes we've been giving about sense control, because Prabhupada explained the mind has three aspects. One is thinking, one is feeling, and one is willing. So when one has a thought, one doesn't necessarily feel anything. But from thinking, if one is thinking about something which is attractive, then one may start feeling the desire to engage in it. And then willing is that point when one is about to do it or does it, or about to do it and can't help oneself. So feeling is also, the mind is a sense, and feeling is a subtle aspect of the mind. So controlling feelings are part of sense control. And so if you were in class on Tuesday, we had spoken about that a little bit. And then I promised we would speak more about it. And today we had a workshop for non-devotees, but they were all spiritualists. And so we were teaching from the Gita about Atma Vinigraha, which means self-control. And so I want to relate what I told them because I think it will be helpful for you. One of the things we understand is that, or as Prabhupada said, we can't be forced to do austerity, or we can't be forced to control ourselves, but we will have to force ourselves by knowledge. And so Prabhupada said, austerity would be a result of one's understanding the need for it, the importance of it, the results it produces. And in contrast to the life we're presently living, the lack of austerity. And if we come to understand that gradually, then we'll want to voluntarily do austerity, like so many people became devotees and moved in the ashram, and so there's voluntary austerity. If you live in the temple, you go to Mangalarti every day, and you chant 16 rounds, follow the regulative principles. So lots and lots of people wanted to do that, and they weren't forced to do it, but the reason they did it is because they, through study of Prabhupada's books, understand that that was the best choice. So the point I was making today in class is that, or was that, point I made was that there are sometimes things which by our conditioned nature we're inclined to do, or we're attracted to do, or we may not be doing, but we're attracted to doing, and sometimes we may do, and we don't want to do it, we know it's wrong. So we were discussing that, the conditioned nature versus one's purified nature, and how to control the conditioned nature, and we gave them an exercise which you could also apply when you have time. So you think of something that you're maybe having difficulty controlling, either a sense or an action or an emotion. And you note down in your mind or note down on paper all the benefits that you would get by either doing something you're not doing, or not doing something you're doing that you need to stop doing or you want to stop doing. So in the workshop today, I think we had an example of anger. Somebody becomes angry. And so then I suggested, well, write down all the benefits of not being angry, write down all the problems that come from anger. And so the ideas, which is basically what we're getting from Shastra, all the reasons to do something and all the reasons or the negative ramifications of not doing it. When there's enough reasons, then it's easier to do. It is said, and you probably have experience, that often you're able to control yourself at a point when you realize that if you don't change, your suffering will be so intense, it'll be unbearable. And so you just decide, okay, I'm finished with such and such an activity, or you decide, I need to do a certain activity. This happens sometimes with japa. One may not be chanting well, and then one makes a decision, okay, that's it. From this day on, I'm going to chant properly. And that decision is so powerful that it alters one's will and determination, and then one's rounds become better. Or from this day on, I'm going to stop eating sweets. Or from this day on, I'm going to stop being envious of devotees and be kind and generous and appreciative, or whatever it may be. And so often it's the frustration or the lack of Krishna consciousness that a certain activity causes, or not doing it causes. And we get to this point and we say, okay, that's it, now I'm going to do this. And it's basically a decision that's made really in a matter of moments. We make a decision. But of course, there was so much that led up to that decision, so much knowledge and so much experience, negative experience. So the idea is, if you want to change something, you have something that you're challenged by, and so we'll use the example of anger here. All the reasons that you would like to be able to control it, all the negative ramifications of your anger, and even all the reasons, including reasons in just terms of how it's affecting you personally, how it's disturbing your own sanity, whatever the reason may be. If you have enough reasons, then you have leverage over the problem, and that the reasons give you motivation, because ultimately we need motivation. I mean, in a sense, you can say if you're motivated, you can conquer or control anything, right? But so that's what Shastra is doing. It's trying to give us a motivation through reasons, like why, and ultimately, you can look at your relationship with Krishna, and you look at some obstacle, and you basically just ask yourself, am I going to allow this obstacle to get in the way between me and Krishna? And that's like a huge motivating factor to control yourself, or to do something you're not doing. Is that you isolate something that very strongly is getting in the way between your relationship and Krishna. It's damaging it in some way, or maybe even preventing it in some way. And then you ask yourself, is this really worth? Is it really worth it? This whatever it is I'm doing or not doing, is it really worth doing it or not doing it? Because it's getting in the way of my relationship with Krishna. So sometimes just that reflection, that meditation, can be so powerful that when we make a decision. Okay, no longer am I going to allow this desire, or this anartha, whatever it is, this emotion, to control me, because it's become such a problem, or it's become the main problem for me, or if it's not a problem, at least we could say it's a big roadblock. It's a big roadblock in terms of my relationship with Krishna. So every one of us has something or some things that we could isolate as, here's a real big obstacle, and it's getting in the way between me and Krishna. When Shamashundar Prabhu was carving Jagannath, and Prabhupada went over to see how he was doing, and he saw that he had a cigarette pack on top of Lord Jagannath. Then Prabhupada said, "Are you going to allow these cigarettes to get between you and Krishna?" So I thought that was a nice question. And then we could ask our question, whatever it is that you think is getting in the way, in some way between you and Krishna, you can ask yourself the same question. Are you going to allow this to get in the way between you and Krishna? So the point is, if you want to change something, you need good reasons, especially if you want to change something that's not easy to change. And, sometimes we'll read something and it strikes us so deeply that right in that moment, something shifts in us. It makes so much sense to us that we should just, right on the spot, we kind of vow that, I want to think in this way. I just read something today and I had that experience. Bhira Krishna Maharaj wrote a book, and part of the book is talking about compassion, and he said something that struck me, which I really appreciated. He said, you can pray for compassion, but sometimes you pray for it, but you don't act with it, or act on it. So it's not that we just pray for compassion, but we should, he said practice, but we don't practice. We pray for compassion, but we don't practice it. Oh, Krishna, give me compassion. It's interesting because sometimes we're praying for something that we don't have, and we don't act on it. We just pray for it, like waiting for that quality to come before we're going to act on it. And that's a good point, isn't it? That we shouldn't do that. Have you ever done that? Krishna, please help me with this, or give me this, or give me that. And you're not acting it, you're not practicing it, you're just praying for it, but you're not practicing it. So that's kind of stupid when you think about it. So I really like that point. He said we shouldn't just pray for compassion, we should practice it. In other words, he gave an example. He said sometimes people mistreat you, or they belittle you, or they criticize you, or they really hurt you. And he said, if you want to practice compassion, when those people do that for you, you should pray for them. Isn't that amazing? Is that what you would have thought to do? If somebody hurt you, that your response would be to pray for them. And that struck a chord with me very, very deeply. In other words, it was for me personally, that was such a powerful reason to overlook mistreatment and not treat someone as an enemy because they said something that was upsetting or disrespectful or abusive. And I like that because basically what he was saying is, if someone mistreats you, you'll tend to see them as an adversary or an enemy, or in some way there'll be some antagonism towards them. But if we're to practice compassion, then even though they mistreat you, you would pray, Krishna, please bless this person. Isn't that interesting? So that hit me very deeply. It hit me so deeply, I think on the spot when I read it, it just shifted me. And it shifted me in a way that was like, yes, this is what I will do for the rest of my life. Anyone can attack me, whatever, and I will just pray. That's practicing compassion. So my point is that to change something, you need a reason. 1 reason, 5 reasons, 10 reasons. Those reasons are there in Scripture, and also those reasons you can come up with. And so if you're challenged with something that you're not able to do well. It's maybe not your nature, or by your conditioning you're very habituated to think or act in a certain way. In order to change that, you're going to need some good reasons. Or you're going to need a lot of suffering. Of course, suffering is a good reason. But you don't know how much suffering it will take and how much suffering you're going to get before you change. So it's more expedient to consider the pros and cons of acting or not acting in a particular way. So you can think right now of something that you would like to change, or something that you're dealing with, and you're finding it difficult to deal with. You're acting a certain way, you're responding a certain way, or it's just you have a certain nature, and that's creating problems either for you or it's creating problems for your relationship. And think right now how it is negatively impacting you, all the ways it's negatively impacting you. I told this story before, many times, because it's an example of this, of I was in a situation, it was a very disturbing situation. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where what you're dealing with, it's just one constant headache. And you kind of hit a point where you just, everything is upsetting, even if it isn't. It's just you're upset, and so everything becomes upsetting because you've kind of gone past your threshold of tolerance. So I was in that situation, and at one point I was looking at myself and I was saying, I'm so out of alignment or integrity with how I normally am and how I prefer to be. And plus, it's not fair to devotees. And I also have to live with myself with this very angry attitude, and it's just not Krishna consciousness. So I had all these reasons, and I was just listing these reasons in my head. And as I listed these reasons, something clicked, and I made a decision that no matter how difficult things are, I'll deal with it in a sober way without becoming disturbed. So I don't remember all the reasons, but I do remember feeling that it was my behavior was unkind and unfair to the devotees, and it was also not the way I wanted to spend my days, just being angry. And those two thoughts had actually struck me very deeply. Now, you might hear that and think, well, that wouldn't be enough for me to overcome my anger if you have anger issues. And that may be true. And you're going to need more reasons and deeper reasons. But the point was, it was enough for me. And something clicked when I had those thoughts. Obviously I had other thoughts. I can't remember what they were, but something clicked, and it clicked so deeply that I actually stopped becoming angry. I can remember distinctly that I shifted. There was a shift in my consciousness. I made a decision, my consciousness shifted, and it was based on reasons. So I also heard something years ago that really struck me. It was a similar point, that if you're not inspired, it doesn't necessarily mean you're lazy. It may necessarily mean you have nothing that's inspiring you. So it's I'm so lazy, I'm not excited. No, it may just be that there's not a service or situations in your life are not exciting you. And so if you find a service that's exciting you, then it's easy to do it. It's easy to be inspired, even if presently you're not inspired. So it's similar. It's like finding reasons that would cause you to respond differently to situations, rather than allowing yourself to stay in a particular situation and tolerate whatever problems you're dealing with without a solution, which is what a lot of us do. So Now, you could also, let's say you're dealing with a situation, okay, we'll use anger as an example. So then what we might do, a lot of us will do, is we'll go to sections of Prabhupada's books that talk about anger, and the results of anger, why we become angry, and so forth. And we just want to read, so that we get an impetus to let it go, give it up, to work on it in some way. We need reasons. And my point is that if you read scripture, you get reasons. You get so many reasons. That's the whole point. It gives you reasons, enough reasons, that ultimately we could make decisions to do anything, even things which are difficult. Now, I don't mean to say we would make decisions which would be inappropriate for us in a specific moment in time, because they would be artificial or something we couldn't maintain. But still, if we have enough good reasons, at least it can get us to the next level, rather than remain stuck in a situation. Does that make sense to you? Let's put it another way. If you're dealing with a problem and it's really got a grip on you, perhaps you don't have enough good reasons to overcome it. And that's why you're allowing it to affect you and you're not working on it. Or you're not working as hard on it as you need to work on it. Let me say, relate another situation. I've been in situations where I had to do things which didn't come naturally to me. In other words, it was a bit of a struggle, either a service or an ashram. Or let's say you were given sannyas and you weren't ready for it, or you're a brahmachari and you were asked to marry and you weren't ready for it. So, how do you deal with it? So, like for me personally, grihastha life wasn't something that I just fell into naturally, that it flowed. It was something that was hard for me to adjust to. It often wasn't, I would just say it wasn't so natural. I wasn't, naturally, I wouldn't do things naturally that a woman would expect a husband to do. Something like that. But when I looked at the ramifications of not doing it and the ramifications of doing it, I shifted. And also, I realized, I didn't realize on my own, I mean, I kind of understood, but another devotee helped me realize that I like to succeed. I'm very driven to do many things and succeed. But I wasn't applying that drive to my grihastha life. I was applying it to other things. And so this devotee made me aware that you need to apply that to everything. You can't neglect. Now, that made sense to me. It struck me very deeply. So again, it was a reason that hit me deeply. And it's just for me, it may not hit you deeply, but hit me deeply. And I said, actually, you're right. And I felt it was hypocritical and paradoxical that I could succeed in doing many things, but not succeed as well in my family life as in other areas. And it made so much sense to me that it shifted me, and then my behavior, it changed drastically, and I never had that problem again of in any way ever thinking that my grihastha life is not important, minimizing it to a point where it could be it could cause problems and like that. So the point I'm making is that if you need to change something, or like get out of your resistance to something, get out of the muck, we say in English, overcome something, change something, control one of your senses, one of your emotions, it may simply be, if you're struggling, that there's just, you don't have enough reason to do it. It's just, you don't see that if I don't do it, there's really going to be any serious negative repercussions. So why go through the pain and struggle of doing it? And only when something clicks with you, that yes, this is why I should do this. This is really important. And sometimes, it may come from a counselor who's just advising you, and it makes you realize something you didn't realize, opens your eyes up to something, and that's like, oh, that's it. That's all I needed. Now I can do it. So now I'll go to your questions. Krishna Karshan says, don't you think the problems that we may read or hear something life-changing and feel inspired to change? But unfortunately, after some time, we are losing the realizations, and we are coming back to normal state, and again, we are acting in conditioned way. What to do to make life-changing realizations stay with us? Is it possible? Yeah, it is possible. It is probably more powerful if you come to those realizations on your own, and or when you're reading what you read, then what's the word I want to say? It becomes like your realization, like it resonates so much with you that it becomes your realization, and then it shifts you. If it actually shifts you, it will shift you. It won't be a temporary thing. I think what you're describing is more like an inspiration, but it's not. But you didn't shift, and so inspiration that doesn't shift, it doesn't last. We see that all the time. I could give very inspiring classes. I could get all of you to do all kinds of austerities if you just give me enough time. I think I could motivate you to do many things. But the problem is I'm motivating you, and you're not motivating yourself. And you are the greatest motivator of yourself. I'm not the greatest motivator of you. You are the greatest motivator of you. And if you just paid attention to what I was saying in this class, I wasn't motivating you. I was telling you how you can motivate yourself. So this is a good question, and this is the reason that you read something, but it doesn't become your own. That was the word I was looking. It has to become your own. Like if Krishna Karshani, if you in the experience of your life or in hearing classes or whatever have a realization that's very deep, it'll change you. It'll change your behavior. But if you read about it and it only acts to inspire you and say, yeah, this makes sense, this inspires me, and nothing deep changes inside of you. It doesn't become your own. What you read doesn't become like your own realization. And you don't feel that it's actually changed something in you, either a decision you're going to make, or you did make, or permanently just the way you see things. Like in your life, sometimes you'll have an experience, or you'll read something in Shastra, or you'll hear a class or go to a workshop, and you'll learn something, or you'll have an experience that changed the way you perceive something. It's just you don't perceive it the old way anymore. And that's not going to change. That's just your new perception. And because it's your new perception, your actions will change to some degree around that new perception. And so you're not going to fall back. You can't fall back into it anymore. Because it's a new way of seeing things. It's just how you are now. Or your understanding. Sometimes you hear a class and somebody clarifies something, and you thought you understood it, but you actually realized now you didn't, and they clarified it, and the way they clarified it actually solved the problem, because now you see it in a different way, and it's not an inspiration. The problem, because of your new vision, you realize my problem was because I had the wrong vision, and now that I've got this vision, everything's fine. Oh, I misunderstood. I thought it was like this, and therefore I was doing that, and speaking this way. But now I realize I was wrong. You've showed me the right way, and now you don't have to worry about falling back into the old way, because you can't, because you don't see it the old way anymore. Just like, for example, in a forgiveness process, the reason you can't let go is you have some story about what happened, like it was unjust, this person shouldn't be forgiven, what they did it's so horrible, if I forgive them, they'll do it again, whatever your story is. And so, unless within the forgiveness process your story changes, you won't be able to forgive. But once you change your story, oh, Krishna arranged this situation, this person was actually a messenger of my karma, I needed to learn a lesson, etc., etc. Now you have a new story, and so with a new story, you don't see the situation the same anymore. And because you don't see it the same anymore, you let go of it. It's no longer a problem. It's not an inspiration. It's not that I'm going to try to forgive or anything like that. You understand? It's not the way you see it. And so because you see it differently, you act differently. If your understanding is this person is a bad person, they hurt me, they abuse me, it's going to be really difficult to forgive. But if later on you realize that there was a situation in your life and you needed a person like this to come and wake you up, and now through the forgiveness process you realized what the message was, then rather than think of that person as your abuser, you now think them as a messenger that's actually helping you. And now, because there's a new story, there's actually nobody to forgive now. So now you're shifted, and you're not going to fall back. The reason you would fall back is that you didn't shift. You didn't really change your story. You didn't change your perception. You just got inspired. But you still basically had the same consciousness. Or you fell back, you didn't shift enough. You know, like sometimes you turn a knob, and I forget what they call it, but it clicks. Turn it, clicks into the next one, clicks into the next one. So let's say you turn it, but you don't click it, it's going to slip back. So that happens a lot. You might think you've shifted, but you actually haven't, and then you shift back. So I think something that is extremely important to realize is if other people are telling you what to do, other people are trying to inspire you, other people are trying to explain to you what your problems are, etc., unless it becomes your realization, unless you understand that, it's probably not going to change you. And we all have experience of both, changing and not changing, you know. That's why when you hear class, if you can hear it in trying to make the instruction yours rather than just being inspired by it, it'll have a deeper effect on you. Or in reading Prabhupada's books, if you can make those understandings and realizations in Prabhupada's books your own, then things will start changing. So my experience with motivation is that if motivation is coming from another person, it doesn't last. And if let's say I visit you and you say, oh, I'm so inspired by, I heard your classes, I'm inspired, but it's not going to work unless you've taken that inspiration in a way that it transforms into realization, or it transforms into something that shifts the way you think or shifts the way you see things. Because then it'll have lasting benefit. But if it's just a motivation, then that motivation becomes like an addiction. Then you need me to come back and pump you up again. And you can, and as I said, if you can't motivate yourself, then you'll be too dependent on others to motivate you. Of course, we need I'm not minimizing the association of devotees, we need that. But for steady motivation, and for anything steady in Krishna consciousness, we need We need realization, personal realization. And sometimes in counseling, you just give people space to figure it out. Because a lot of times I've been counseling people and I'd say something which triggered them with a realization, which was not actually where what I was saying was going, but it triggered them and it went another place. And they just said, thank you. This solved my problem. And what I said didn't solve the problem. It triggered them to have a realization, and then they solved it themselves. And then there was no need for me to talk. But if I'm talking to solve the problem, I'm going to have to talk a long time until I feel that they're starting to get it. Because if they don't get it, that means nothing's really going to change. It's just, okay, you got it in your head. But when you have something in your head, it just floats around as information. And so, of course, information is useful. But unless information transforms you, it's just information. And it's like a book on a shelf that you haven't read. Okay, I just bought a book. Okay, I just heard a class, information. It's like a book on a shelf that you haven't read. Okay, you have information. But until you act on it, it's just information. Of course, it's good. If you don't act on information you have, then it's a book on a shelf which you can go to, which you can access. So you go to a class, maybe all you get out of the class is information. No transformation, no assimilation, no practical application. So understanding this, then when you hear a class or when you're with your spiritual master, you want to take the inspiration you get and be able to transform that into an assimilation of what he taught that becomes your own, becomes you now own what you heard. And when you own what you heard, that's when the transformation takes place. And then when you own it, unless you fall from, there's a major change in your life where you become overpowered by Maya, then those realizations will generally stay. Internet interruptions, yes. Does that make sense? Of course, we can always be covered. But generally, if you have good sadhana and you imbibe realizations and ways of seeing things, they'll stay with you. You have another phenomena for some men in ISKCON. Depending on where they grew up and if they lived in an ashram or not, and where that ashram was and what year it was, some men, or we could say many men, grew up with some negative attitudes towards women, which they didn't bring into the movement, but they gained as a so-called means of keeping them somewhat sober sexually. And after they realized that they actually had wrong attitudes, and those attitudes were not helpful, and not that they were not only helpful, they were just wrong. They had to make some adjustments in their attitudes. So they realized they were wrong, they made adjustments, and then they started thinking about women differently. And that became the new way they think about women. So even if they fall into Maya, their attitude towards women will still remain the same because that's their realization. Or like if you learn to forgive someone, as I said, you deeply imbibe forgiveness. Even if you fall into Maya, you're still going to have those attitudes. So unless you commit offense, and Krishna just kicks you out of Krishna consciousness, that if you develop attitudes through realizations, or you could say forms of consciousness, generally speaking, they become imprinted like samskars. It's just how you think, it's just how you see. I used to think this way, now I think this way. I used to think this way about grihastha life, now I think this way. It's just the way you think. It doesn't really matter if you chant good rounds that day or not. That's just how you think. Other things, yes, If we're talking more about maybe sensual control, yeah, that you may fall down if you give up Krishna consciousness, or you don't have good sadhana, then you will fall back into those things. But certain things realizations you have they'll be permanent ways of seeing. And so when you have those permanent ways of seeing, then you have permanent ways of behaving. And they'll be steady. That's just how you behave, because that's how you see things. And we all have experience of that, right? Of changing how we see things, which changes behavior. And then we don't go back to the old behavior, because we see the old behavior was based on a misunderstanding. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. So, I think one thing we can take from the answer to this question is utilizing the association of senior devotees or spiritual master, utilizing classes and reading Prabhupada's books in trying to make those teachings ours, trying to assimilate those teachings in a way that they affect us deeply enough that it changes us. Something changed. Like, I'm not the same now. I've changed for the better. There's been a shift in my attitude. There's been a shift in how I see devotees. Like I was saying earlier, when I read what Bir Krishna Maharaj said about compassion, it shifted me. It was like, to me, it was like a missing key in my understanding of Vaishnava relationship. Because if someone doesn't like you, if someone's critical of you, we'll tend to just avoid them, or we'll tend to have, if we don't say anything negative, we'll tend to have negative thoughts about them. And of course, often we will say negative things. And Maharaj was pointing out that Krishna consciousness is not about friends and enemies. That's material duality. And so, as devotees, we can't have enemies. Enemies, devotee enemies. Let's speak of devotee enemies. We can't have enemies. That's not Krishna consciousness. And if we can't be benevolent towards someone who disagrees with us or who mistreated us, then we're not really being compassionate. We may make believe that we are, but we're not. So I really like that. It struck me in that something shifted. And hopefully, I think, I'll be able to remember that. And Maharaj, he also told me something else that shifted me. And it was just information. But I think the reason these things shift me is because I'm thinking in those terms, and it's like a missing link to my little puzzle there. It's like the last piece of the puzzle. I'm trying to understand how to better myself in a certain area, and then I read something and go, that's it, that's the one missing piece. So Maharaj and I were talking about various needs devotees have, and how sometimes when we respond immaturely to a situation, it's just that there's a need that's not being fulfilled, and then that emotion comes up, whatever it is, anger or jealousy or depression, that emotion comes up. But behind that emotion is a need that's unfulfilled, and if you understand the need, then you can gain control over your emotion. Like, you're angry, but why? What's the need you're trying to fulfill? Well, a lot of people, the need is attention or control, something like that. So then we would say, well, is there a healthier way to fulfill the need for attention or control? Could you take charge of a department? You can control that rather than get angry at other people. Something like that. So I understood that, and we were discussing that in relationship to one particular devotee who sometimes doesn't deal well with other devotees, and he's a senior devotee. His dealings are not, let's say, sympathetic or respectful, and very autocratic, and just like, this is how it is, and you better accept it, or I can't work with you. I can't deal with you. So he's asking Maharaj, well, how do you see that? And he said, well, I see everything in terms of needs that we have. And so he just has a need. For him, his need is that everything where in his area where he works should just be a certain way. And that's in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That's the first need, which is security or stability. So he just needs that everything, where I'm in charge, everything just has to go this one way, and no one should mess it up. And I was realizing that I have a stronger need for variety than security. If things are always the same, it actually bores me. Even I give the same seminars, I give them differently because I get bored doing it the same way. So my need is more for variety. That's the second need of Maslow's. And so when that devotee and I come together, then my need for variety is to kind of branch out. Why do you have to do it this way? No, this is the way it's always done. We have to do it. Yeah, but there could be a better way. No, this is... So Maharaj is saying, well, just see it in terms of his need, and it's not that, even if he doesn't treat you well, you understand he's just trying to fulfill his need. And that made so much sense to me. It was just like, yeah, that was like a missing piece of a puzzle, and that changed me. So, you understand what I'm saying? That things... We want to be able to go deeply. Now, obviously, you're probably thinking, well, yeah, you were ready for that. That's why it changed you. And it's true. And maybe I read some things I'm not yet ready for. And that may be true. But as far as possible, try to be ready for that. And try to, when you read something, try to take it in your heart. There's another thing I read the other day that had a very powerful effect on me. I think another shifting effect. And reading and hearing and chanting, it's supposed to shift us. That's why, if you're reading and going to classes and you're not getting shifted, that's not good. It's meant to shift you. So there's a chapter where Prahlad Maharaj is traveling and he meets what they call a python. They called him a python. He's a human being, he's a sadhu, but he's just lying on the road, and he was kind of chubby, and Prahlad Maharaj said, how'd you get chubby? You're just sitting here. You renounced everything. And he said, well, people bring me food, and somehow I get what I need. And he said, well, why did you decide to just sit on the road and give up doing anything? And he began explaining. He said, I saw people weren't happy. They were endeavoring to be happy, and they were doing so many things and working so hard, but they weren't getting what they wanted. So I decided I would renounce. And so in the purports there, Prabhupada is talking about simple living. Just earn enough money to get what you need, what you require. And something has been bothering me for a long time, because when we're on Facebook, there's always Facebook ads, and there's always some guy talking real fast and sharp and slick with his little drawing or something, telling you how you can make money with this or that or this or that, or sometimes even showing you their mansion and this and that. Every time I see those things, my gut instinct is like, what a waste of time. You could be doing so many better things than just focusing on making money and teaching people how to make money. And but there's another side of me that thinks, well, maybe you should learn this because you could use money also. And then Prabhupada in his purport, he was really downplaying the effort to make money and really upplaying that once you have what you need, why do you need to work harder than that? And he said, even the Vaishyas weren't about income. The Vaishyas are about growing food. And only if they had more than they needed would they engage in commerce and sell it. So even the Vaishyas weren't about making money. What we see today in the world is a perverted situation where people feel that it's their God-given right to make unlimited amounts of money and work 15 hours a day for it. And so Prabhupada was over and over and over saying, the life of devotee is simple. Just, you don't have to, another place Prabhupada said, if you're storing, investing, storing large amounts of money, he said that's defending. You're not depending enough on Krishna. Okay, family people, we need financial security, we need some savings like that. But, so Prabhupada, I was reading this, and it was kind of reinforcing what I had learned years ago and what had kind of defined my own consciousness and my relationship with money. And it just brought me back there, and it was really important for me because I'm not a Vaishya, and even the Vaishyas today, they're not Vaishyas. They're not, because that's not how Vaishyas live. They're just money-hungry Shudras that have a brain for making money. And because they have a brain for making money, they're just absorbed in it. That's really what it is, if you see it from the eyes of Shastra. And I think it's important for us to see that. And in Vedic society, Shudras actually didn't have money. They were not capable of dealing with money. They worked and they were taken care of. So now you have Shudras making 150, 200,000 a year, and their wives make the same thing. So, it's all about accumulation and so forth. So Prabhupada was explaining all of this. And somehow or other, for me, that just resonated, because that's how I think. And it was a confirmation. This issue also came up in some class, maybe last week or the week before, or it was last week, when the question was asked about, sometimes you see devotees living what appears to be extravagantly, and how to understand that. And of course, every devotee situation is different, and we can't judge. But what I read was relevant to that question, where Prabhupada was saying, just get what you need, keep your life simple. And the nature of the world now is you start a business, if it goes well, start another, expand it, or start a new business with that money, or just keep expanding, get more. That's the name of the game. So for me, that had a very good effect on me in like confirming the values I live by. That, it's not that life is meant for working hard so I can get a house which is twice as big as what I have and call myself a success or something. Or, if I make more money, I can build a swimming pool in my backyard. Wouldn't that be nice? It's hot in Florida, right? And I could add more rooms onto my house, and have guest rooms, and I could, and I could build, gold walkways around, It's like, there's unlimited things you can do with money. But Prabhupada's saying, just work for what you need so that you can keep it simple. Now, Radhika says, it's very powerful to notice when others treat you with compassion, especially when you don't really deserve it. This kind of makes you think, if this person can tolerate me, my complaints with... If this person can tolerate me, my complaints, with kindness, I can tolerate my problems. I can change. I can be better. And that also makes me think how powerful compassion is, and inspires to extend compassion to others. Yeah. That's very nice. If you associate with a devotee who has good qualities, certainly those good qualities will affect you, will rub off in some way. Of course, Prabhupada has said compassion is one of the foundational qualities of devotee, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur said compassion is one of the foundational elements of Krishna consciousness. So we can't minimize that or ignore that. It's a reality. The compassion is what primarily distinguishes devotees from other spiritualists who are spiritualists who are more concerned about themselves. The Vaishnava is concerned, paradukkha dukhi, he's unhappy because other people are unhappy, and he wants to do something about it, and he wants to help everyone become happy. And he as Prabhupada said, he feels for other people based on his own experience. It's not superficial. And he sees people suffering, and he knows what suffering is. The other day I was with some devotees, and I said, you know what it's like to be inside a body, don't you? I go, yeah, it's, sometimes your body hurts, sometimes your mind hurts. Sometimes you're in stress, anxiety. Sometimes you're hungry. Sometimes you have sex drive. Sometimes you're envious. You know what it's like to be in a body, and it can be quite uncomfortable, especially if you're not Krishna conscious. Right? And so we were driving somewhere, and I said, look at all these people. They all have bodies. And because you know what it's like to be in a body, you can look at all of them with compassion, knowing how much they're struggling with their minds and senses. They're not devotees, they're struggling more than you are. And you're a devotee, you're struggling, but they're struggling more. That's compassion. That's what Krishna says. By reference to your own suffering, you understand another's suffering. And the power of compassion, when applied to people who aren't nice to you, is that even though they're not nice to you, but you understand, but they're in a body, and what do you do when you're in a body? You're just trying to get through the day, right? In some sane state, and you're just trying to do what you have to do. And sometimes in a person doing what they have to do, they do something to you which is unpleasant. So when your compassion comes in, then you see, okay, he's just trying to do what he has to do to keep himself together. You understand? So then I know he's got so many anxieties, so many struggles in his life, and so many things. So I don't have to get back at him. I can understand his suffering, and I can understand probably in his suffering he made me suffer, or that came out in some way. So compassion that's how a devotee thinks, and that's why I like what Bir Krishna Maharaj said. If someone's not nice to you, but you're a devotee, you're not supposed to see friends and enemies. You're supposed to be everyone's well-wisher. So that's what we're supposed to be. Is it easy? Of course not. But that's what we're supposed to be, and that's what it means to be a devotee. And you can't. I think one of the things that we try to do is subconsciously ignore some of the qualities of devotee and think, well, I don't have to have those because I do I do good service, etc. And so what if I'm not so compassionate? Does it really matter? Because I do good service. But if there's certain fundamental characteristics of bhakti and characteristics of a Vaishnava, yeah, it does matter, because it's going to get in the way of our spiritual advancement. So like Maharaj was saying, we have to practice compassion. So, okay, granted we may not have it, or not have as much as we want, but we can practice it. That's the idea. So let's go down and see what else is going on here. Amrita Vilasini, all the way from Taipei, where I will be there tomorrow night. Did you know that, everyone? I'm going to Taipei for 5 days. Jai Shringarvat. I think we should start from self-compassion, then it's easier to feel compassion for others. I'm not saying about self-pity, yeah. Well, sadhana is, I believe, the highest possible form of self-compassion that you can give yourself, because through sadhana you'll develop your love of Krishna, and that's the greatest gift you can give yourself. So when we speak of self-compassion, if you want to be self-compassionate, then chant good rounds. Get up early tomorrow. and be absorbed in Krishna consciousness. That is the greatest gift you can give yourself. And now, Krishna Karshana, you might say, well, sometimes people just by nature are not self-compassionate. It's not even a question of sadhana. It's just they're not self-compassionate by nature. And that's true for whatever reason. But if those same people seriously dedicate themselves to their sadhana, because that's an act of self-compassion, it will help them in their other parts of life, because they're acting. When you act self-compassionately in any aspect of your life, it will infect your others, generally. So even if you take care of yourself physically, you'll be more inclined to take care of yourself spiritually, or you may be, because you're in the mood of taking care of yourself. Especially, this would be true of someone who doesn't take care of themselves well. If they start taking care of themselves physically, then they'll tend, or the chances are, they'll start taking care of themselves, more of themselves spiritually, because they're in the mood of self-care. Self-compassion, for some devotees I know, doesn't sound like a Krishna conscious word. It sounds like a psychological term, or maybe a term for someone who's suffering from beating themselves up. They just have a very low opinion of themselves, like a more of an emotional, psychological issue, which doesn't relate to your average devotee who doesn't deal with those issues. And that may be true to some degree, but again, self-compassion means I have to take the time to practice Krishna consciousness, give myself Krishna consciousness. I have to be kind to myself. And so self-compassion definitely is part of Krishna consciousness. If you want to look at it in psychological terms, and how that applies to Krishna consciousness, I would say it applies to guilt. When we fail, when we fall down, when we do something wrong, there's guilt. Now, Prabhupada said if there's too much guilt, it's going to handicap you. So if there's too much guilt, self-compassion could allay some of that, balance it out. Some guilt will cause you to rectify the situation. Too much guilt can cause you just to give up. So if one can be self-compassionate or self-forgiving, okay, I fell, I committed a mistake, I did something, but let me do better next time, and let me forgive myself for making a mistake. Sometimes I tell people, and I just read this also, that if you're not willing to forgive yourself, you need to if you're not willing to forgive another person, you should forgive yourself for not forgiving them, because by not forgiving them, you're harming yourself. So sometimes we need self-forgiveness. Like if I get angry at someone, I should forgive myself for being angry at them, because I'm harming myself. So this kind of self-forgiveness, self-compassion, it sometimes is required if we're kind of falling due to one reason or another into the mode of ignorance as a consequence of failing in something. If we belittle ourselves, it's really hard to get back on our feet in an enthusiastic, inspired way. And so with self-compassion, we can say, okay, I did make a mistake, but I'm going to learn from this, and I'll do better next time. And so you kind of dust yourself off, and okay, I'm human, and these things happen. That's healthy consciousness. So that's necessary. Whether you think it's a Krishna conscious term or not, at least the principle is Krishna conscious. And we've talked about this before. Compassion will be generated from Krishna consciousness. So automatically, if you take care of yourself, you'll be compassionate. And like you're saying, it'll be hard if you don't take care of yourself. But if you don't take care of yourself in Krishna consciousness, you won't advance, and then where will your compassion come if you're not advancing? So we have a question from Steph Roberts. What is the balance of saving in Grihastha life and hoarding and not hoarding? Why don't you read that chapter? Right, it's Prahlad. I have it on my iPad, but the iPad doesn't tell you what chapter it is. But the chapter in which Prahlad was traveling begins. Prahlad, he's going traveling, and it's probably the 7th canto. I'm not sure what chapter it is. If you can find it and read that, that'll give you a balance. The basic message that Prabhupada is giving is that, let's say you're able to make a lot of money, but it comes naturally and easily. You have karma for that. It's not a problem. And of course, what you do with the money could become a problem for you. But more of a problem is that we're trying hard to accumulate more and more and more, get bigger this, bigger that, and there's too much focus on that. That was Prabhupada was against, And if there's so much focus that it's minimizing the time and the mood for Krishna consciousness, then that's bad. So hoarding for me may not be hoarding for you. But you have to see practically. I was speaking to a devotee a couple of years ago, and he had a very good job. It was causing him a lot of distress and causing his family and wife distress. And as we were talking, he said that there's a better job for me. It'll be better for my Krishna consciousness. And if I take it, I'll have to sell my home and get a smaller home. But I think I'm going to do that. So that would be an example of that. Okay, he's going to take less pay, but it's more conducive to his Krishna consciousness, and he's going to have to reduce his living standards because he won't be able to afford it now with that new job. So something like that. That could be an example. Skarshini says, don't you think that on Kanishta level we should not even try to see friends and enemies equal? Because it might be artificial and may put us in trouble. Better avoid enemies and make friendship with devotees. Well, in the context that Maharaj was talking, he was talking about seeing devotees as enemies. But devotees don't have enemies. That's the thing. We don't... just because you might see somebody, he's not Krishna conscious, but if he's not attacking you, he's not an enemy. You might be an enemy to the world, but personally not an enemy to you. Oh, if he's trying to destroy our movement, this or that, yeah. But Maharaj was speaking in general and specifically about devotees. Devotees don't make those distinctions. What if my favorite sadhana is to wake up early and be alone, chanting, reading, and then I am ready to be around others come class time around 8? But a part of my duty, living in the temple, is to be at Mangalartik and Guru Puja. I'm trying to change my mindset. Yeah, well, you either have to change your mindset or, live alone. So that's a decision you're going to have to make. Or put on blinders. Saying about self-compassion, I mean being understanding for ourselves, understand our lacks and limits. Some people tend to be harsh, even cruel. Yeah, but that's just an unhealthy psychology. Generally, from what I've studied and I've found, if a person is harsh on themselves, they're really not harsh on themselves, but what's happening is that somebody in their life was harsh on them. So that belittling talk that they're telling themselves is actually, they're just repeating what they heard, usually from mother or father, but it could be a brother or sister or a priest or whatever. It could be somebody that was constantly saying, you're not good. And so if they say, oh, everything I do is wrong, something like that, then they're just hearing what that person was saying. And so yes, those people will have a harder time because they've got all that script already programmed in there. So at least if they realize that, that's the beginning. That it's not that they don't like themselves. It was that somebody was putting them down, and now that script has become their own. And so if they can distinguish, that's a good starting point. And yes, it is the Python story. Read that Python story. It's really good for money and simplicity. Yeah. So can we stop here? It's 9:15 where I am. Tomorrow night I am flying to Taiwan, the time we should be giving class. And so I won't be giving class, but as far as I know, we're going to have classes morning and evening, starting Monday morning up through Friday morning. So if that's true, that's 2, 4, 6, 8, that's 9 classes. So we'll do our best to broadcast those, and I just wrote them to find out the times for those classes. So when we find the times, we'll post on Facebook, and then you can attend. So we'll miss tomorrow's class, but we'll have 1 or 2 classes a day. We're going to be talking about humility and low self-esteem. Krishna Karshini says, I met businessmen who are giving up sadhana, saying that they are having making money time and are doing it to have lots of money, just chant and read, etc. And then Prabhupada said, Prabhupada once said he thought the same way. But Krishna had another plan. Krishna Karshini, I was actually thinking about this morning because I had just read the Python story. And if you just take the part that I'm working hard to make money, so what is he saying? To have lots of money, to chant and read, etc. In other words, have lots of money so they can retire. Yeah, that's good. But to give up your sadhana, that's been kind of a common thought over the years. That we'll minimize the sadhana and make more money, and then we have more money, then we'll increase the sadhana. But it often, number one, it's not our philosophy to give up sadhana. And number two, by the time you make the money, you may have been so out of practice of sadhana that you don't want to. Your goal is no longer your goal anymore. So I think that chapter on the Python answers the question also. And so if anyone tells you that, just tell them to read that chapter. And that whole chapter is about the goal of life is to be Krishna conscious and just make enough money to live, so it doesn't interfere with your Krishna consciousness. Yeah. Okay, so we'll end here. And Hare Krishna, everyone, and we'll see you, I guess, Monday morning, perhaps. Anyway, we'll send you the message. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.